Dude, how about this shirt? Do you know this band? Do you remember this band from your misspent youth?
I don't, but as soon as I saw the t-shirt, I was like, that is a freaking cool t-shirt.
Dangerous Toys, dude. Dangerous Toys put out 2 records. They were a hair metal band that had modest, just very they had a song called Scared that was kind of like a hit, and a song called Teasin' Pleasin'. That was stupid. But I mean,
Teasin' Pleasin'?
Yeah. Dude, hearing it in the accent. Teasin' Pleasin'.
Teasin' Pleasin'?
Yeah, dude. Oh, and I loved them. They were like, kind of like, I feel like maybe Southern rock, just real sleazy. Man, as a kid, I don't know about you, but like, I grew up in Montana, away from anywhere, away from city, away from even like, there wasn't even what I perceived as like a Montana culture. Like there is in the south of the states, there's like a Texas thing, you know? And there's like a, yeah, dude.
Teasing, pleasing, dude.
Yes, dude.
Yeah. And before he started singing, I was like, I know exactly what his voice is going to sound like.
Yeah, it's raspy. Dude, I loved that record. It probably doesn't hold up too well in terms of like lyrics that respect people, women. But it's like, here's what I was getting at with this. Like, first of all, dude, this shirt is real time. I bought this shirt in the 90s. Yes.
No.
And then, you know, I wore it some or whatever. And then I was like, oh, that's stupid. Like I wasn't into hair metal anymore, right? Because it wasn't cool. And so I put it in a box and forgot about it and found it. Like,
amazing.
When I went back to Montana, it was at my dad's house. I'm like, this was like finding, I don't know, man. It was like finding a great old bass. I was like, this shirt from my youth, dude. So anyway, super
amazing.
Fun.
Go for it.
I just wanted to tell you or ask you, do you ever like when you got into hair metal or when you got into certain kind of music or hip hop or anything, did you ever feel like it was a culture that was so far removed from your own life, but that's why you liked it? Did you ever feel that way about music?
Whoa. I'd have to think about that. Maybe, I guess, yeah, like it was, like for me, I'm trying to think about the first hair metal-y people I got into. It was really like Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, those guys, right? And yeah, I guess that it was like completely different to
like
anything.
Aliens.
Yeah, like Aliens, and also none of my friends were listening to that stuff either.
Right.
So it was like kind of just a thing that I had on my own. And if I tried to share it with anybody, they were like, are you mad? Like it was all about like dance and rave music over in the UK at that time. It was not about Steve Vai.
There's this great book written by Chuck Klosterman, who's an awesome like rock writer. He's written for Newsweek, and it's called Fargo Rock City. And essentially the crux of the book is about him growing up in rural America, loving this crazy like hair metal stuff. And he makes this argument that, you know, there's like white kids in the burbs that come up and love hip hop. Or there's kids like me that came up, you know, kind of isolated from city life or from a music scene that love Motley Crue or Guns N' Roses and his whole thing is that it's that, you know, parents are so scared of it, right? But his whole thing is, no, it's about the fantasy of it. It's so far away from what your reality is like that it feels like a movie. It feels like a different universe. And you're like, wow, I like this so much because it's not my boring life. And he said, in a way, it's kind of a sweet thing, like growing up loving this like scary or like horror movies, you know, like if you actually probably experienced real horrible stuff and trauma, you're probably not watching horror movies, you know, but it's like a safe way to experience intensity. And I think that that's why I grew up. I was like, I didn't want to be in the Lamborghini hot tub with Vince Neil and Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx, but I liked that they were doing it.
Oh, dude, I wanted to be in the hot tub, dude. I was like pulling on them tight Speedos. I was like doing my lunges.
Dude, that's wild. Yeah, you want it in. You want it in the tub.
Oh, dude, yeah. Like when I was listening to like Guns N' Roses, like, can you remember like Appetite for Destruction?
Dude, incredible.
Dude,
it's an incredible record. Yep.
There's so many of these. Like for me, like the first time you heard them albums, right? In kind of sort of like many different styles, but all of them rock for me. I can remember like the first time I listened to Appetite for Destruction and I just went bonkers.
Unreal.
Like listen to the first time I heard Porn and Graffiti 2 by Extreme.
Yep.
With Nuno and like, the first time I heard like completely different, but never mind. The first time I heard Pearl Jam, first time I heard Rage.
Dude, yes. Do you remember? I remember where I was when I first heard Rage. Do you have that experience with any of this stuff?
Like all of the stuff that I just said, that I can remember exactly when I was.
Yes.
Exactly where I was. All of them albums.
Man. Yeah. I remember when I first heard Smells Like Teen Spirit too. It felt like this is something this is new, and I just saw in my mind like someone like hammering the nail in the hair metal coffin. Like there's one and like, like this band was never going to work again. Dangerous Toys was never like post Nirvana. Sorry, fellas, not happening.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think that when you hear something like that, it's maybe like there's sort of like this element of originality to it. And I think that there's so many bands that you listen to and it instantly kind of sort of like it's easy to hear exactly what they've been listening to become who they are today, right?
Yes.
But like you listen to that sound and you're like, oh, they sound like that because they've listened to X, Y, and Z. There are a few bands though, when you listen to them and it's confusing. You're like, I'm not exactly sure why you sound like that. And that for me is when I get really excited about it. And I think that it was something that Alan Holdsworth said. I've been going down this fusion rabbit hole for the last few months. I was listening to this interview of Alan Holdsworth and he said something really interesting. He was like, he said, I never really wanted to be a guitar player. I wanted to be a sax player, but I couldn't get one. Yeah, he wanted to be a sax player. And he said it was just like really into listening to sax players. And he said something that he really wanted to be original. He strived for it more than anybody I've ever heard about. Like to a probably sort of like an unhealthy extent. And something he said in this interview, he said, I was listening to sax players and he said, and every time I listened to a sax player, he said I could hear where they'd come from in terms of their inspirations. He said, until I heard Coltrane, and he said, I just couldn't hear it. He said, I just couldn't. He was like, I couldn't work out who he'd been listening to sound like that. Wow. And that's what he wanted to get into his playing. And dude, I've been listening to a lot. How have we gone from Appetite to Destructions and to Alan Holdsworth in one sort of like sentence? But I'll bring it back around.
I love it.
He said, but he said, so when I play, he said, I want that separation. I want to be so unique. And dude, like when I listen to Alan Holdsworth, that guy is a freak show. He's a freak show in all of the best ways. He is just 1 in 7 billion. Like what he did is just incredible. And I've just been listening to a bunch of interviews about people that worked with Alan Holdsworth and how he approached music and how he approached them making music on his albums, and just really asking them to do things that they'd never been asked to do before, but in a kind of a way that was just, not very prescriptive. Like, for instance, he didn't tell them what to play, ever. He didn't tell them what time signature it was in because he didn't think in time signatures. Even saying that out loud is... What?
Wow.
He didn't think in time signatures. He was never like, oh, this is in 4 and this is in 3 and then the bar 3/8 here and then 6/4. He just had this sort of like if you watch him play, he's never tapping his foot ever. He kind of sways back and forth. And I just love this original approach to music. And I think that just bringing it back to Nirvana, when I heard Nirvana, I was confused in a great way, but I was like, who have they been listening to sound like that? And I think that obviously, I think there are influences in there, but I think maybe the mix of influences and the approach is what completely throws you off. And I just, yeah.
Oh yeah,
I love the
and it's so
originality to it.
me too. And it just feels like for me, when saying I didn't want to be in the hot tub, but I wanted to see that world. Like I was kind of scared of it a little bit. Like whoa, and same thing for me with Nirvana. Like it was scary, and even the Black Album with Metallica, because I didn't have any prior knowledge of Metallica. But Enter Sandman came out, and I was like, holy shit! Like what is that? Yeah. And it was scary to me, and but scary and inviting, scary with the finger that's saying, like, come here. And I'm like, oh, I don't know why I'm compelled to do this.
Yeah.
But man, I mean, that is, boy, like, especially in adolescence, that is such a potent thing when something comes out where you're like, oh, whoa, you hear something or you see something. Maybe it's visual stuff or it's a movie style. Filmmaking does this too, where every number of years there's like a director or a style that happens where it's like, wow, it blows everything up. I mean, like, think about Blair Witch Project. Remember when that thing came out? And it just completely reset things, like in horror. And boy, I love that stuff. It's so compelling to me. And I've always wanted to be the person experiencing it in safety. like I want to be comfortable experiencing it, and Vince Neil can be in the hot tub, but I don't. But I love that you're in the hot tub, dude.
I'll be straight in that hot tub. But what interesting to what you were saying right there, it kind of made me first of all, it made me think a little bit about it made me think about how we used to experience music versus how we experience it now.
Yeah.
And a question I've been throwing around in my mind is it because of the world that we live in? Is it the sort of that the factor that changed, right? The world that we live in, the way that we consume music right now, just the environment changed. So has that influenced or affected the way that I actually consume music? Because it is so different to what it used to be for me, right? I do not sit down with albums and just sort of listen to every single piece of it.
Yeah.
I don't do that anymore, and I really miss it. And is it that, or is it an age thing? I'm just I'm mid-40s now. All of those experiences that we've just talked about were when we were younger, right? We were in our late teens, early 20s or whatever. Maybe it was an age thing. Maybe that only happens once in your entire life. Maybe everybody has that experience once in their life and then it's gone and it doesn't ever come back. That's sort of that discovery of new music and new culture, which is to what you were talking about, that draws you in. Maybe it's just gone for me, right? So I've been sort of toying around with this. And actually, I think it's a little bit of both, but I think it's much more to do with the environment that we now find ourselves living in and how we listen to music. And the reason why I think it's that more than an age thing is that over the last 4 to 6 weeks, I have been having that same experience as I did as a child. I've been going deep. I've been listening to albums on repeat. I've just been and I've been listening to them when I'm going to bed. I'm putting my phones in and
cool.
And I'm listening to it, and it's been a really, really amazing experience actually to really jump into all of those albums again. And I've been thinking a lot, and you talked about it on the last podcast about you were thinking about living above a bakery and coming down and creating artisan bread and that whole thing. And when you were saying that, I was thinking about that. I've been thinking a lot about lifestyle design and being more intentional about how I'm living my life and and being more intentional about music and how I'm actually consuming music as well. And I think that, it is available to people now in terms of listening to going deeper into certain artists and albums, but I think that you've got to be much more intentional about it now. I don't think that I think that when we were younger, it happened as a byproduct of the environment we were living in. We didn't have all of the music available, all at our fingertips, all at the same time. which is what we've got now. You want any track, any album, anytime, you've got it. Sign up for sort of like 2 cents a week or whatever, and Spotify will give you that. And that is great, but it does, for me, at least for me, it comes with the downside of it is that you don't really go deep with these artists and really like live them, like really absorb their music. So you've got to be, if you want to, if that does, if what I'm saying here inspires you or makes you want to try and go back or experience, if you're a younger person and you're like in your sort of like, teens right now or in your 20s and you're like, fuck, I've never experienced that because I've always had Spotify. If you want to experience that, I still think that people can do, but fuck, man, you've got to be really intentional about it. You've got to be really intentional about it.
Yes. And I love this thread because I want to pull on this for a minute because I think though that, so intentionality, yes, you have to be really intentional about it. But here's the thing that I think is different about why are you being intentional about it now versus this time last year?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm really inspired because there's a reason.
Yes.
There's a reason. For me right now, there's a reason because I'm doing an album and it's, and I want to really just soak myself in the sort of like that music. I'm listening to the greats that did it before. I'm listening to people within that genre, within that style that are going to inspire me. But also I'm trying to learn from tonal choices. What was their tonal concept? Like how are they getting that sound to work within that type of music and stuff like that? So I'm going deep, and through that I've had this holy shit moment where for me, because I've had that reason, I'm like, oh shit, I'm doing exactly what I did when I was younger. And it was this sort of like, kind of like just, oh, it can still happen moment.
Explosive.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So it's kind of, to your point that the reason why I'm being more intentional about it is because I've now got a reason. Mm-hmm. There is a question to me now, like floating around in my mind is like, do I need is that what we need to create for ourselves? A reason to be intentional? Or do we just need to be more mindful and intentional of it? Maybe after this spat that I've done, after this album, is there a new reality where I'm just sort of like more conscious of how I'm listening to music and being more, I hate to say it, more disciplined about it, less sort of like a freaking fast food, just like stuff in my face full of shit, just like, give me a burger, just shoving it in there and just a juice just flowing, just sort of like, just like less of that and like less and more of, I actually want to consume the right food because I know it's good, and like, when do I want to consume that food? How am I going to consume that food? Like, just being more intentional about it. And yeah, like, I'm really inspired. I'm really inspired about music.
Man, I know, and I can see that. And it's so, and for anybody listening, Scott's doing this. We've talked about it a bit, but I just want to, if you've jumped into the podcast, Scott is making a fusion record. He is like carving time out because, and here's the thing, Scott is busy. Like you're busy. You wouldn't have to make music, but it's important to you. And I love that, dude. And it's going to inspire me. It's going to inspire a ton of other people. You're making sort of like a 80s, 90s throwback fusion record. And you've been listening to Alan Holdsworth. What's the record? Is it Hard Hat Area?
Oh,
is
dude,
that one that you've been?
Oh, dude, I've just been going so deep on Hard Hat Area. So it's like, so deep. It's been amazing. Like, I've been listening to the album on repeat. I've been like making the kids listen to it. It's so good. And it's like Gary Husband on drums, who is just such an amazing player. So I've been going, but I've been going deep. I mean, like, I've listened to like 3 Holdsworth albums. Yeah. So I've just gone on Spotify and I'm listening to, I'm going back to the start and listening to him just like we would when we were younger.
Cool. Yes.
Like, listening to all of the earlier albums and like I'm just like, they're all blowing my mind. And because of that, I've got really excited about Jimmy Johnson, who was like playing on those early albums. Bass player, Chad Wackerman, who actually, like did play with Scooty for a while, but like I've got like deep into Chad Wackerman, man. Like, amazing. I'm just, and I've been listening to all of the drummers. I've been listening to the same track with 3 different drummers playing on it. And I'm
So
like
cool.
listening to the track over and over and listening to how the different drummers approach the same track.
Dude,
I'm
it sounds like
oh,
it sounds like you're 17 again. It's so
it feels
cool.
like it, man. It feels like it.
You know, and the thing that I wanted to say too about this is like, you either have, there's this time, you know, when you're talking about when you're coming up and you're so excited. And, you know, when we were coming up and the music world was different, was partly about environment, right? And like there was no Spotify, but also it's about privilege. I want to say like it is about having a home environment where like you don't need to work a job to support your family as a young teenager, and you have all this leisure time. There's a roof, there's food, your mom is, you know, helping you pack your lunch or whatever, you know, or whatever it is. Like there's something about being a kid and having a very supportive household that I just don't want to take for granted. There's not everybody that has that, but that's something that I had, and then I know that you had, but until you didn't always have it. I mean, you chose then at a moment to head out and go on your own as a teenager.
I moved out way too early.
Dude. Yeah. I mean, you know, but like, so maybe it isn't, I don't know, as I'm saying this, maybe it isn't all just about like privilege. I mean, I'm not trying to say that like you were privileged, Scott. I just think there's a time, there was a time for me as an adolescent boy that I had time and opportunity to check this stuff out before I actually then had all of these responsibilities.
Oh, dude, yeah. You're privileged with time.
Yes.
Like, you've got all the time. Like, I can remember, like, even Lisa and I, we sometimes just sit there, we just think about, like,
pre-kids.
The fuck did we do before we had kids? Like 10 years. We could have been doing all of this awesome stuff. I think I was just sat there with a thumb stuck halfway up my ass. I'm not sure what the frick I was doing. But it's true. To your point, privilege with time.
Yes.
I feel like I had more of it when I was a kid. It's obviously, you know, hindsight. I will say that I think I had more of it / I had all of the teen shit that everybody else has when they're a teen, and it is hard.
Yes.
I can remember, like, people used to say, oh, if I could be back in my teenage years again, I'd love that. I would not go back there if you paid me a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
Because it was hard, like going through puberty and stuff like that, and finding out, like, I was actually really insecure. I felt really insecure. I wasn't sure of who I wanted to be, or like what specific skill set I had, or what I was supposed to be in life. And I felt sort of like a freaking, like a boat without a rudder. I mean, I felt sort of like rudder, like I just felt really bad. So for me, I guess my point is that I think I did have more time, but I think I also spent a lot of time just worrying about like pointless stuff, but felt really important to me at the time. It was really important to me. You know,
of course.
Yeah, but like I think my early 20s, like that's when I think I was more secure and definitely had more time to play with and oh, dude, yeah. But saying that, man, like I'm loving life right now.
Dude. Yeah. I mean, and the insecurity thing, everybody goes through it. Everybody is going through it still. It's always junior high at some level for everyone. You know, it's always high school. We always are battling with those things. It's funny, man. I got to see Amos Heller play a show with Florida Georgia Line at the Minnesota.
Player, dude.
Yeah, man. He's Taylor Swift's bass player, and he was playing with Florida Georgia Line. And I went to the Minnesota State Fair and saw him play a set, and it was packed. I mean, I don't know, tens of thousands of people. And I actually wore this shirt because he's a big hair metal fan too. And I was I took a picture of it, and I'm like, I wore this shirt for you. And he was like, oh, dude, we were talking. And then we got on to talking about like body confidence, because this shirt is a XL or whatever. And I was really big. I was tall and big. I think I was 6'2" and probably about 240 pounds in the 8th grade. And that is a big That is a big 8th grader.
Because people watch you on video and they don't know that you're really like, you are a Viking. Like, I'm convinced that sort of like if we follow your lineage back far enough, you're living over in the Nordic states, right? And you are hunting moose or something, and you are like throwing them. Like, I had a girlfriend, dude, who was Norwegian, and she was this tiny little blonde thing. She was so small. She was like probably about 5'5" or something like that, really petite. And I met not a boyfriend. I was a boyfriend. I met a brother. Well, he came over to stay with, and he was a Norwegian fisherman.
Yeah.
And he was exactly how you just pictured him right there.
Big dude.
Dude, if you stripped the meat off me and stripped the meat off him, he would just be like just bigger. Just like I can remember looking at his hand and not his fingers. That his hand was just big, and his arms and his sort of like frame was just big, and you are sort of like you are. Do I mean like, wow, you like yeah.
Well, it's funny because I am mostly at peace with it now. I mean, I still struggle with like body confidence issues and weight.
Oh, dude, if I could be bigger, I would be bigger.
And see, I have always felt the opposite. The grass is always greener. So Amos was talking to me, and because I told him I was like, I was this huge 8th grader, and he was like, I was always the small, mouthy kid,
he was
getting into fights and stuff. And he's like, it didn't work out so well, like tiny and mouthy, like not a great combo. But I was always like the big, like awkward with like, I didn't know where my limbs were in space. I was terrible at sports. I mean, I've told the basketball story before, but like,
I wonder if you feel bigger than you actually are right now.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
I wonder if because of that experience, you actually feel bigger than you actually are, like taller than you are.
Sure.
Because you're actually not like, you're like
I'm
an inch or two taller than me.
No, I'm not like crazy tall. I'm like 6'2.5". I sometimes say 6'3", but that's a lie. I'm 6'2.5". But man, I mean, I would have given anything in the 8th grade to be wearing a size medium shirt. And like, I was just this big, and like girls didn't look at me. Like all of my friends that were little and like wiry and fast, like the short, wiry, fast kids. Those are like the cute guys. And I was just sort of like this big lummox, And man, it's funny how we carry those narratives forward. I mean, and I remember my mom saying to me, like, don't worry, like, oh, sweet Beth, my mom, like, don't worry, like pretty soon, like the girls are going to want the tall guys. And I was like, I don't know, Mom, like, cause I was like this much taller than everybody, I mean, it's a funny thing, like going back and thinking about those times, like the privilege that we had, but still, like you say, all that teenage shit that we were just mired in,
Yeah, it's funny as you're talking about that. I'll tell you a story. It's the exact opposite of your story right there. I'm good friends with a guy up in Carlisle still, which is where I was born. I was in in sort of like the same year at school. He was tiny.
Yeah,
he was tiny. He was the smallest kid in the year, and I think he was probably the smallest kid in the year below him as well. He was just tiny. And the weird thing was, he was just like a late grower. He's exactly the same size. He's 6 foot. Right now, he's 6 foot. And we were talking a few years ago, and he said that he's still got a complex of being really small.
Oh, wow.
Because he was really small at school until much like when he was 16, when he sort of sprouted up. But until he was 16, he was the small kid, and everybody knew him as the small kid.
Yeah.
From when he was like 4 years old to when he was like 14, 15, like almost a decade of time he was a small kid in school. And he like carries those scars with him. He's like, I still feel really paranoid about my size. And I was like, he was trying to like describe it. I was like, this is like breaking my mind. I was like, but you're the same. I was like, do you not look at me? And you're like, I'm the same. He was like, I know it, but he said, I feel way smaller. Yeah. Super weird, sad. Right? Super weird.
It's just, and the thing is to know, everybody has something like that. There is no one walking this earth right now, unless they're like a delusional sociopath that is like, I'm the perfect size, I'm the perfect weight, I'm beautiful, I'm confident, I'm positive, I'm doing well. Like, no one feels that, because we're all just trying to get over the things that we felt about ourselves as kids, It's
absolutely,
wild,
man.
Dude.
Do you think that when you were listening to music, just to take it back to the music thing that we were talking about, and I guess to sort of to encapsulate for me exactly what I'm doing. And my question to you is, I guess what I'm doing is sort of like intentional listening, right? Like that's kind of what it is. It's like intense listening, but it's kind of like really intentional. I've got sort of like I was talking about it earlier when I was like, listening to the same track. I'm listening to 3 different drummers. I'm listening to like Gary Novak, Gary Husband, and Chad Wackerman playing that same track on those different albums and stuff like that. Really intentionally listening to it. And I think that when I was younger, I was doing that, but sort of like I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I was like really like nerding out about, maybe not to that extreme, but it was really sort of like deep still. Like, did you have that same experience? Were you listening to it on that level? Yeah.
Yes. I had a Walkman, right? And then later a Discman, like cassette tapes at first and then later CDs. But we would always go to this great music store and I would, go through and find the things. And then just on the ride home, because Montana was so big, to get to the nearest really great record store was like a 2.5-hour drive. So sometimes, we'd take this trip to Missoula, and we'd go down and I would put on the headphones and just be transported. I mean, music to me, I'm sure it was like this to you. I think that everyone that comes up that is doing this for a living probably at some point had this thing where you just close your eyes and it's just a new world. You're uncovering. You're like, I wonder what that sound was. It paints pictures, right? It's like, oh, you wonder what's making that. Like there's a keyboard sound. What the hell? It sounds magical,
And because you're listening to it over and over, because because of the way that you consume music, like, earlier on in our lives, just like listening to the same stuff over and over because we couldn't like listen to like a bunch of stuff because we had to wait. Okay. Because of that, you would just ended up like listen to it intentionally by accident, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What do you think? I'm thinking about the audience listening. Hey guys, I'm thinking about the audience listening and just sort of like, what do you think the benefits of intentional listening are? Like, what do you think that people are losing or if they're not doing that?
There are so many. And I can't wait to hear your answer to this too, but my mind immediately went to session world for what I do. So if I'm playing on something, if I'm playing on someone's album, there is always a desired outcome. Unless someone is saying like, hey, Ian, do your thing or do whatever you think or like play a synth sound or, like I do get those requests. But typically when I'm playing on something, there is a specific goal in mind. And I find that I am able to get there faster if I'm really actively listening to music, or if over my life I've consumed enough of that genre. If someone says Beatles, and I've told the story before of not knowing the Beatles early on in my session career and getting fired, I changed that. If someone says Jamerson, if someone says John Paul Jones, if someone says Tame Impala, there are so many new references that we sort of Tame Impala or Charlie Puth, or people throw away, these like pop artists as, cheesy or not good because they're new, or Lizzo, but so much of that music has so much to offer in terms of if you intentionally listen and go, oh yeah, this is a vibe, and you can you uncover it as a lane, like the Soulquarians thing, the neo soul thing, right? Or the indie rock thing that for me was like almost started with the Killers. I know that's probably people are like, what? It didn't start with the Killers, but for me, that was my in to indie rock. There's so many things where if you have intentionally listened, or if you do intentionally listen, you discover all of this color, and then you can use that when you play on something. So I think as a professional bass player, I think listening and understanding those lanes is more important than any piece of gear. It's more important than browsing Reverb, which I'm always doing now, and I need to remember to not. Yeah, I know. We're just talking about this. Yeah. Like your JMJ, Justin Meldal Johnson, the great JMJ, who plays with Beck and others, talks about your record collection, and I put that in quotes because do we have record? I don't have a record collection, but it's the stuff that you listen to. It's the stuff that you love that defines who you are as a player. And the more you expand it, the more you move and listen to other things, the wider and cooler and more nuanced you get as a player, and you're able to access things quicker. Someone says, yeah, Schooley's Farrison, and you would know. I would know less. I need to expand into that way, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for me, music listening in terms of my professional career, and not even just for enjoyment, but it has actual tangible results and benefits for the things that I do in the music that I make, and even for SBL, making these deep dives on things. I mean, I love doing that because I love listening. I loved listening to Chuck Rainey play on Peg. I loved listening to the fake bass that Charlie Puth played on Attention. They are no different to me. It's just lanes. It's no different in terms of quality to me, actually. It's just different vibes. And so I think in terms of a professional career, listening is absolutely critical. And I'm going to step off the soapbox, and I would love to know too, like how you feel about this question, or what do you have to gain from critically listening?
Much of the same of what you've just said, actually. I'm not sure I'm going to say anything different. I think by not doing it, this is, I guess, to sort of like for context, this is why I worry and kind of stress about the environment that we live in now. And I'm not like in the ye olden days, it used to be better. I'm not that person, okay? But I worry about the environment accidentally removing the ability for people to consume music in a really deep way. I worry about that. And the reason why I worry about it is because I think that it is such an important, like, critical element of becoming a musician. It's critical.
Yes, it is.
To do exactly what you've just said, to go, really like listen to like Jameson, listen to these. It doesn't need to be Jameson. It can be like somebody that's more in alignment with who you are as a musician, right? So if you're a rock player and you're like, go listen to the rock, but listen to them. Listen to them intentionally and listen to them actively, and also go really deep. There's for me, that's the bit that I worry about. Somebody listening to this and go, oh yeah, I'm a rock guy, I need to go listen to Jeff from Pearl Jam, right? Yes, but then like really to sort of like, and I know that this sounds like hard, or it doesn't sound hard, it sounds like a lot of work, and kind of it is if you're not enjoying it. But here's the thing, you should be enjoying this. You should be really enjoying this. It's not just listening to Jeff from Pearl Jam, it's then going all through all of the records and listening to how his tone changed, how his approach changed, how the production changed, how it's just nerding out. It's then like, what other projects did he do other than Pearl Jam? Go listen to those. It's like, and then do that for like 2 months. And then, but when you're doing that, just sort of like go down that rabbit hole, and then go do it on somebody else, right? Go down. It's about like being intentional and like actively listening, like not putting music on and just sort of like letting it play. Actually, putting it on, and then after 3 tracks, you can't do it anymore. Your brain's blown out because you've actually been really concentrating on not like what the next bass should be that you should buy, or what your the argument that you had with your spouse yesterday, or what you're going to buy from the supermarket on your like actually actively listening. So after 3 tracks, your brain's fried. Like that's actually, for me, I can actively listen to probably like, honestly, maybe like 40 minutes of music, 50 minutes of music, and then you're
exhausted.
I'm exhausted.
Yes.
Yeah, like for everybody that's listening to this podcast, when is the last time that you did that? When's the last time that you felt exhausted after listening to music? It's a great kind of like litmus test to sort of like, are you actively listening to music? Probably not. I certainly wasn't, and it's sort of like, I've been thinking about this recently, and just to go back to what I was saying earlier, I think it's so important to do this. It's so important in everybody's, development as a musician to really go deep and go nerdy and like intentionally and actively listen to artists and bass players and other musicians like this. And there's so much to be lost by not doing it. There's so much to be not like lost. And I guess sort of like if people wanted like action steps, it could be fun just to talk about that for a second.
I would love that.
Like they're like, okay, I need to be intentional. I need to actively listen to things.
Now what?
But now what? Like if I was trying to kind of sort of like package it up for some, if I was talking to a friend, if I was talking to Ian, for instance, and I was like, hey, this is what I'd try and do, I would probably try and choose an artist. Not even a genre, and it could be a genre, but just like try and like make it super focused. Try and pick an artist, whether that's a bass player or a band or whatever, right? Try and pick an artist or a band, and then just try and like nerd out about them. Like get on Spotify. You can still do on Spotify, right? Get on Spotify and look at the discography, right? What have they recorded? Go right back to the very beginning. Start listening to the old stuff and listening to the albums, not jumping around.
Right.
Try and ban yourself from doing that. Not jumping around. No, I'm going to listen from this track and then this track from that album. No, listen to one album and listen to it for a few days and really absorb that. Then move on to the next album. How does it differ? What is different about it? Did their approach change? Like, just go deep and like challenge yourself to, not jump around these different albums. Try and sort of like consume one album at a time, and it is hard. Like I am sort of like on a carnivore diet at the minute. I am eating only meat. We can save that for another episode and talk about that. I know. So I'm only eating meat at the minute. It is not easy. It's hard, but you know what? It's actually good for me. It's actually I'm like already, I've done it now. Well, I've done it before in my life, but not to go down that rabbit hole, but I've done it before in my life and it worked out really well. Doing it again, but just to say it's hard. Doing these things sometimes, like getting really super focused on things is hard, but the benefits are freaking huge, especially when it comes to music. You don't have to just eat meat.
And I love this idea too of doing a record, and not because Spotify, Apple Music, whatever, there is this temptation to listen to the top tracks, right? The top 10 tracks, and that's cool too, but that is not as deep as like diving into an artist. And the thing is, like, if this sounds daunting to you listening to this, Scott is right. Like, doing it, you start to enjoy it, and you start to even think about the music. Like, don't think about it as like, oh, I like this and I don't like this. I've always said this to students, like, don't think about, I like country music, I don't like country music. I like hip hop, I don't like hip hop. No. You're listening for a purpose. You're trying to better yourself. Like, there's, it may not be the thing that you're listening to in the car, blasting on the way home from work. That's fine. Listen to whatever you want in there. Like, I like soundtrack, and I don't mean soundtracks from a movie. I just mean, I like listening to music that fits the situation I'm in. So if I'm in the car, I want something that feels big and exciting and fun. Or if I'm driving at night, I have certain music I play for that. Or I was telling your kids and you that I have records that I play on the plane.
On the plane,
yeah. An M83 record, I think called "Hurry Up, We're Dreaming." Midnight City as a plane takes off. I love to hear Midnight City. But when you're doing this,
so freaking cool, dude. That's really intentional, right?
Yeah, it is.
You've got these different soundtracks for different things in your life. That's so freaking cool.
And it just makes me feel good, Yeah. But the danger in the soundtrack to your life is that you're always listening to the same thing. And so this thing that Scott is saying about intentionality around listening to new things, the benefit of it. Now, it might feel hard in the beginning, but what happens is you discover these things, and then you sort of then you know about them. And then you're the friend saying, have you checked out Robert Glasper's new, have you checked out like Alan Holdsworth? And your friend's like, Alan Holdsworth. You're like, dude, listen, you become the evangelist for this stuff. And that's cool. Artists, other musicians want to work with people, bass players, musicians that are excited, that are enthusiastic, that are still, as Steve Jenkins would say, letting the inner music fan drive the bus. He said that on his podcast, and I love that. The inner music fan is still driving the bus. Is your inner music fan still driving the bus? And if it isn't, this idea that Scott put out of like listening to a record, go back, listen to the whole thing front to back, ask yourself like, what do I like about it? What do I not like about it? What's interesting about the bass sound? What's so cool about the drum production? I mean, your mind can go anywhere. And the benefit, I'm getting to the benefit, and you've already said it, Scott, but it's that it will broaden your playing. It will be, it's almost like a different style of practicing. Yes, you need to practice your technique. Yeah, you need to practice your vocabulary, but your musical references inside of your head, the things that you're going to draw from when you improvise, that you're going to draw from when you write a bass line, when you pick up your instrument, that all stems from the music you listen to. The music that you have intentionally listened to over the course of your life is the stuff that makes your playing. So how do you want your playing to be? Right? Like
exactly
right?
that. Yeah.
Like maybe you need to think about an artist where you're like, ooh, I have always really wanted to check out X, Y, Z. I'm just becoming a Brit. Like, then go do that. I mean, I have that stuff. Like Scott, you hipped me to Bernice Travis Earl's playing. Boom Bishop, who plays for who plays for Yeba, who plays for Glasper, and Lala. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Layla Hathaway. And I mean, I just need to dive in. So here's the thing, Scott. I'm daunted because I don't totally know where to begin. Like I go, oh, I want to dive into this playing, and you know, here I am saying you should do this, but I still get daunted by it. So if you have advice for me or advice for others listening, how do you start? I want tangible, like, what do I do on Spotify? I go all the way back. What do I do? How do I make that first choice to get into actually starting to listen?
I would love it if people were listening to this and they automatically have got like a few people they're like, oh, maybe it's this person, maybe it's that person. I think most people listening to this will probably, they'll have like an influence on the bass. Like for me, just putting it out there, for me, I'd probably do like a bass player because I'm just really into bass. Yeah. I'm really into bass. So I would choose a bass player and just go really deep on those, you know, find out what albums that they've played on and go absorb those albums. Try not to jump around too much. Try and absorb, you know, an album at a time. Try and spend a week or two with one album. I'll tell you what, it can be, I think that, you know, like this kind of like, you know, fast food consumption of music where we're stuffing our faces with everything, you know, kind of like how we consume content on Instagram or, you know, YouTube. You just go from one video to the next and you know, that fast food consumption thing going on. I think it's maybe a habit thing as well that we've built up over time, because Story, my son, he's really into Steve Jablonsky, who is a composer for all the Transformers films. He's done all the soundtracks, man. And so he is so deep on this stuff. Like he's gone down that rabbit hole.
I love it.
Interestingly, and he isn't jumping around like listening to lots of tracks. He listens to one track at a time. Here's something weird, sort of just to point out about it. He does it on a device that he can't see all of the other tracks. He does it on a device. He does it on Alexa. So he's not looking at an interface that, like an app that's trying to keep you on there,
right? And
showing you all of the other options that you've got,
right?
He can't see anything. He says the track name, it plays, and then he plays it until the end, and then another track will play. So at least it's worth considering that, like, it's also possibly like about the device that you're consuming the content on, consuming the music on there. Just putting it out there, that it could drive actions that you don't want, like as a sort of like as a byproduct of it. So think about what device you're listening to it on, and whether you can, you know, whether you can sort of like have that really insular environment that you want, where you're just focusing on one album. Yes, which is what Story's been doing. There was one thing that I wanted to jump into. It's gone though. It came,
Well, I wanted the blueprint, and it might be as easy as Google it, right? But when you are thinking Schooley's Farrison, when you're thinking Pino Palladino, when you're thinking Boom Bishop, when you're thinking Thundercat, and you want to research and you want to find the albums and you want to do it, what is the first? I mean, I'm sorry that this is so simple. But really, like, what is the first thing that you do? Because I think this first step is really critical. And I sometimes are like, oh, people will ask me questions on Instagram of things that I'm sort of thinking, well, just Google it. Like, don't make me answer this question for you. Like, just go ahead and Google it. But do you have a website that you check? Are you going on IMDb?
No.
Okay. So I can't wait.
I'll give you an example. So,
please.
I really like a guy called Daniel Kamada.
Yes.
He's a fantastic bass player. Kind of like an understatement calling him a bass player, but we'll call him a bass player for now. He's like crack as a musician, just so good. And I was really, and am really into his playing, and I wanted to go deep on Daniel. So I went onto Google and I'm just searching to see what albums he's on, but that isn't going to be the end of it. I'm searching to see what albums he's on. That's sort of like, first thing. Then I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to search his name. I'm going to find out what artists he's playing with. Are there any sort of like live albums that he's on? Like live shows and stuff like that I can find on YouTube. So I'm doing that, especially find out what artist, because he hasn't got a lot of solo records. So I'm going to try and find out who's he played with.
Yes.
Same with Schooley. Who's he played with? Who can I find who he's played with? Then I'll research their albums.
Yes.
I'll be like, okay, he plays with this guy. I'm going to go research his albums or her albums, find out, is Danielle on those albums? I'm going to be researching the bass players. And then also what I got really into as well is I paid for whatever like YouTube, an upgrade to YouTube or something like that, so I can listen to it with my screen off. So
nice. Yes,
I could find like concerts of people on YouTube. Danielle was one of these. I found a concert. I was like, oh, great. So I could listen to the entire album, that entire live performance without watching. I don't want to watch it.
Got it. Yes.
I don't want to sit there and watch it because I don't want to consume the music like that. I will do that afterwards. But for me, it's about listening first.
You want to hear it, yeah.
I want to hear it, yeah, because it's a different experience. You've got two things going on. If I'm watching it and listening to it, I'm staring at the bass. I'm oh, what's that bit of gear there? What's that?
Where are those knobs set? And it's like you miss the point. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So get rid of that. I would really, really recommend just listening to it. And that's how I'd approach it. And then you're just going to go deep down that. Just start pulling on that thread. Who's he working with? Do you know what I mean? Like all of that. What albums is he being on? What live performances can I find on YouTube? Did I pull on that thread? Keep going. When you find something, I did talk about going back in the discography. You don't need to go right back to the beginning. Like you could start right in the middle, but don't jump around. Find an album that really resonates with you and then listen to that. And I'll also say that I found albums by artists, let's say Schooley's Farrison, for instance. I found an album that he was on. I listened to it and I was like, nothing's really grabbing me on this.
Sure. Yeah.
There's not enough bass on this. I'm not really getting it for now. It's not going to, no harm, no foul. Move on, find an album that's going to grab you, And once you do, then go deep.
That's a great point because you're not going to fall in love with everything, right? But it's all text. But then the cool thing is when there's a record where you're like, then you have that in your quiver. Then you're like, oh, well, his real amazing playing is on this. And he did this. And it wasn't. But it gives you context, right? Yeah. It's like, it's everything. And, you're talking about bass players. Just for me, I would love to tell people, like, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have some level of bass nerd, but maybe not. And I will say for me, even though I truly consider myself a bass nerd, I am more drawn to songs and bands than specific bass players. Now, that wasn't always true. There was a time where I was really excited about, like Michelle and Dago Cello, but I think that was because of her songs more than her actual bass playing. And I was excited about Victor Wooten, of course, and Brian Bromberg. And Brian Bromberg, I liked his playing more actually than his songs. But now I find that what benefits me the most is understanding like the cultural musical context of a genre or band. So like when I didn't have a really good handle on the Beatles. It was really understanding that. And then because of those songs, I was drawn into Paul McCartney. And the same thing for Zeppelin. For the longest time, I was like, I don't know, Zeppelin, it's hard to get in. Stairway to Heaven, of course. But then once I really decided to dive in and listen to those records intentionally, I was really excited about John Paul Jones. So sometimes for me, the opposite is true. That happened with Radiohead as well for me. Radiohead was so daunting. Radiohead, the genius band. And I was still listening to the Chili Peppers and like Rage Against the Machine. And I was like, Radiohead, I don't know. But once I really decided to go in, I was like, this is brilliant. And then the incredible playing of Colin Greenwood stood out to me. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be from a bass nerd space. And it doesn't have to be from a band space. It can be either or both. But I think this blueprint that Scott's saying is find the thing. What is a thing that's interesting for you? For me now, it might be the band that I don't know about that I should, like Queen or something. I really need to go hard on John Deacon from Queen. And for Scott, it might be a specific bass player. Well, find the thing, that keyword, whether it's the band name, right, the bass player, put that in, and then into Google. And then I love this idea, Scott, of you going on YouTube and finding maybe a live record, but then not watching it. And I mean, shit, everybody, that is going to take discipline.
Big time.
Discipline, right? I mean, or playing it and just putting your laptop screen down really low, or turning your phone over so you can't see the screen if you don't have the service.
I think that people are going to be like, "Oh, that is really interesting." You will hear things if you're not watching it that you wouldn't have heard otherwise. You're
so right. So right.
Yeah.
Man, I need to take this blueprint into my life because I often, I'm the person here saying it. We are, together. But I think that sometimes I am like, intentional listening. And then I go to that frickin' Spotify top 10 and I listen to the one tune and I go, okay, now I get it. Sure, I get it. And and then I'm like, hey man, I just went deep on Khruangbin, but I didn't really. I listened to the few tunes, and I have found, like you're saying, Scott, I find that I get the most value and then long-term value of when I actually dive deep. When I go hard on a record, then it gets into my playing, it gets into my vocabulary, and it's amazing. So I think this is really good advice, and it's
freaking fun, dude.
Yeah,
it's fun.
I love it.
It's really fun when you get into it. It's like I think there is a bit of a discipline thing to begin with, and I think that it's like anything, people might find it a little harder, or if they haven't been doing it for a while, maybe use old schoolers who are like, oh, remember when we used to listen to music and we just used to do it I actually think that is totally still available to us.
For sure, you're right.
And I think
it is.
It's really exciting, and I'm like truly really excited about it. I'm really thinking about it hard. Like I was thinking about the album that we're doing, and I was like, should it only be vinyl?
Oh, cool. Yeah, right.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you can only get it on vinyl. Maybe you can only get it on... You can watch the live performance of it on YouTube. If you want to buy it, you can get it on vinyl. I'm not saying that's going to be...
And it's not going to be on Spotify and Apple Music?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
It's probably going to be on Spotify now. Anyway, dude, let's call it. Dudes, thank you so much for listening today. It's been a really freaking fun conversation.
Yeah.
I said it last week. I'll say it again. If you could leave us a review over on iTunes or anywhere you listen to this, that would be amazing because it really helps us get the word out about the podcast. And also, if you want to check out the video versions of this podcast, we do it on YouTube on a separate channel. Actually, it's got about 500 subscribers. You could be our 501 subscriber.
Yes, get in there.
Just go to YouTube, search Scott's Bass Lessons Podcast, and you'll find us there. So we'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.